Thank you. Back on the record, Mr. Tan.
Your Honor, after having consulted with Dr. Case and explaining to him the process of sealing the records, we would like to question Dr. Case regarding Exhibit 9. I'm not sure if you all have a copy of Exhibit 9, Your Honor.
I do not have a copy of Exhibit 9 in my petition package.
Okay. Do the members of the board have the copy of Exhibit 9? Okay. Your Honor, it seems like you're the only person that doesn't have Exhibit 9, so
I'm wondering if I'm just missing it because my exhibit says withheld. I'm wondering if it's somewhere else in the petition package that I'm missing.
Your Honor, apparently you have a redacted copy of the petitioner, of the petition. So if I may approach, Your Honor, I can give you an extra copy without redactions. It should have Exhibit 9.
That would be helpful.
Thank you, Your Honor. If I may approach.
All right, thank you.
So at this juncture, we would like to also introduce Exhibit 9 into evidence with the understanding that it will be sealed later on, Your Honor.
All right.
With that, Your Honor, we have nothing further for now, and we turn the mic over to petitioner.
All right, do you want to move exhibits 1 through 14 into evidence?
Sure, Your Honor. I'll do that right now.
All right, Doctor, do you have any objections to exhibits 1 through 14?
No.
All right, exhibits 1 through 14 are admitted. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do, Doctor, is I'm going to have you stand and I'm going to swear you in. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm, under penalty of perjury, that the testimony you give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please have a seat. And please state and spell your name for the record.
My name is Kenneth Burton Case, Kenneth Burton Kaisch.
All right, Dr. Case, it's now your opportunity to present your case. And as I mentioned before, the board does have the benefit of having the documents that you have submitted. All right.
I also have some other documents. Mr. Gardner suggested that you might find it helpful to have information from colleagues with whom I have relationships to see, how I am functioning now. So I do have 2 letters with copies for the board.
Why don't you go ahead and hand those to me then, and I'll pass them out to the board members. And then Mr. Tan has a copy as well, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, all right. Thank you. And I'm marking the documents you've provided to me, Dr. Case, as Exhibit A.
Mhm.
Oh, is that a different one?
Yeah.
Extra? That's fine, I'll take that. All right, Dr. Case, we had some extras, so I'm going to return those extras to you.
So it's my time to make a statement?
It is.
Okay. I'm sure you all know that psychotherapy is very much contextual, and you've heard the complaint. You haven't heard the context within which that complaint arose. And so I'd like to begin by providing that. I do not typically employ the intervention that I did on that fateful day, and I have since discarded that from my
If you decide to read something, please lower the microphone. You can just speak, just give me a high.
Okay, it's very good. Yeah. the client came to me, and when I asked him if he had what he wanted to work on, he basically said his life was going pretty well. He was there for didactic therapy. And there was this one hitch, and that is that he was in his first practicum. His client was an Asperger's patient who had been sexually inappropriate with other students on campus, and he was having trouble with that client. He was having trouble even getting the client to attend therapy sessions. His supervisor in his first practicum was very upset with him and basically indicated that he was going to be failing his first practicum unless he could bring the patient in and show some kind of substantive progress. As the client talked about this, it seemed very clear that he was not willing to approach his supervisor and to say, how come at this late date, this was in the middle of December and the end of the quarter was, I think, shortly thereafter in mid-January, and there would be a 2-week Christmas vacation. Why aren't you talking to your supervisor? And he said, well, you just don't do that at my school. That's seen as defensiveness, and that is the kiss of death. So it seemed clear to me that he was taking a kind of victim approach to things. Here he is caught between a rock and a hard place, the rock being a patient that won't show up, the hard place being a supervisor saying, you must make this happen somehow, and if you don't, you're likely to fail your first practicum. And the client thought, gee, if I fail my first practicum, I'm probably going to wash out of the program. My error was I took too much responsibility for his discomfort and figured, gee, we need to do something right away to make a change here so that he doesn't wash out of his practicum. I then employed a 3-part intervention that I learned from Virginia Satir back in the 70s. And that was an intervention called body sculpting, where you have the person adopt a physical posture that represented their internal state, and then use that as a way of trying to access the emotions that are driving that inner state. We began with a supplicant's posture, where the client is kneeling on one knee with hands up, gazing up at a superior in a posture of supplication. We did this, and the client didn't notice any emotions, no change. So I then escalated the intervention. I have a small stool in my office. I brought the stool out. I stood on it. That way, I'm even higher over him. He complains that he was looking at my crotch. I consistently kept saying, no, I want you to look up. Look up at me. You're looking up at this person who is now in the dominant position. He still didn't notice any emotion. Then I escalated the third step, and this was the place where I really went off, and that is I put my index finger through the fly of my trousers and said, okay, now I'm pissing on you. Now what do you feel? Unlike the petition or the statement, he said, oh, I get it. And he began to get the sense that, okay, he's adopting a victim position and that's going to harm him. We then sat down he sat down on the couch, I in my chair, and we did debrief. It still doesn't excuse the error on my part. When I learned this intervention and when I employed it, I had no sense of that being sexual. I see penises having at least two functions. Only one of them is sexual. The other is for urination. And that was the way that I was employing this intervention at the time. When I got the letter from the board saying there was an investigation, I couldn't figure out, well, why? What's the problem? And then as the accusations were presented at a later point, I was truly aghast because I simply had not seen my actions in the way that they were portrayed in the accusation at all. Since that time, going through probation, I've come to see, yeah, I did cross a line. I am truly sorry about that. And trouble is, you can't go back and get a redo on all of this. So I'm here before you to petition for early termination from my probation. I believe that I have been rehabilitated. I acknowledge my fault. I have done everything in my power to comply with all of the stipulations for my probation. I'm not sure if you want me to go into what I have done. I know it's on paper in front of you. I had a psychological evaluation basically to determine whether I was fit to practice. The evaluator found that I was, my ability to practice was inhibited and the probation told until that report was filed with the Board of Psychology. I passed the ethics test, first and only try. My apologies for missing that first quarterly report. There was quite a bit of confusion as to when did my probation actually start, and it just wasn't clear to me. Was it October 8th? Was it October 26th when I was allowed to practice again? Was it some other time? And with all of the hubbub of trying to comply with everything within that first 90 days, I simply forgot about the quarterly report. I addressed that as quickly as possible and believe that I've been in compliance since then. I did the 12 months of psychotherapy that the board required. I wasn't satisfied that I had gotten to the root of the issue, which pushed me to, kind of jump in and take responsibility for the client's anxiety here. And so I continued with my therapist, Dr. Lemaster, and until we both felt that, okay, we've gone through my history enough. It's really clear where, my early family history kind of pushed me to take more responsibility than was appropriate. And we both felt, okay, I now have a pretty good handle on the situation and think that I'm going to be okay. So I actually did 20 months of psychotherapy, not the required 12. I've had 2 years plus of practice monitoring on a weekly basis. I've never missed a session unless I've been out of town on vacation. I've had lots and lots of continuing education, as I'm sure you all can see in the documents there. I've paid all the cost associated with my probation. I believe that I've understood my mistakes and addressed them thoroughly. I believe I've resolved those mistakes and the parts of my personality that pushed me towards them. Both Dr. Lemaster and Dr. Lichman, my practice monitor, also believe that I've resolved these. I want to make it clear my mistakes were not done out of malice. They were not done out of disregard for my clients' well-being. My intentions have always been to help my clients, even though I have erred in this case in several respects. I've learned a great deal in the course of this probation. I would say the most valuable parts for me were the individual psychotherapy, the practice monitoring, and the educational review with Dr. Lockton. From the 20 months of therapy, as I said, I thought it was my responsibility to solve the client's problem, and this is an issue from my family of origin, and I think that I understand why I did those things, and I think I have disconnected from, some of those drivers. The educational review with Dr. Lockton helped me see how the role play could be considered sexual. That was the one piece that was kind of lacking. I really didn't get that. I was looking at it in one way and just hadn't thought, well, somebody else might have looked at it in another way. And then the practice monitor was very useful. I've had several difficult cases over the course of my probation, and it was really wonderful to have somebody there on a weekly basis to be discussing the case with. Okay, what are the dynamics of the case? What am I doing? What's the client doing? What's the best way to address the client's situation? So that's been very helpful. It also was helpful in terms of trying to figure out how to present the paperwork at the beginning of therapy to my clients. One of the things that I've always felt is that when somebody comes to me for treatment, usually it's close to a crisis, if not an outright crisis. They don't want to sit there for an hour and talk about informed consent and all of the other pieces that we need to. And so prior to this, I had just told them, here are the documents, please take them home, read them over, and then bring them back the second session and we'll discuss them. Well, I would give them a verbal informed consent for what I considered the big four: child abuse, sexual abuse, elder abuse, and right now with my nervousness, I forget the fourth, I'm sorry. At any rate, I think that I have been very diligent in my own rehabilitation and feel confident that I will not pose a threat to the consuming public.
Doctor, if you would just briefly explain to the board the two letters you provided that have been marked as Exhibit A, also, since these were not originally in the petition package.
Mr. Gardner had suggested when he got my petition for early termination, he said, you didn't have any letters from any of your colleagues or people who know your work saying, how you're doing now. And he said the board might want those kinds of letters. And so I went and asked two colleagues if they would write letters, and they have, and you have copies of those in your possession now.
All right, Doctor, Mr. Tan's going to have an opportunity to ask you some questions, and then I believe after that we may be taking a break. We'll just see how that goes. All right, Mr. Tan.
Thank you, Your Honor. When you applied the technique that you learned from Virginia Satir at the time of your first interaction with patient DS, when you applied that technique, it wasn't for sexual gratification, was it?
No.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm not that kind of person.
And as part of your petition, on AGO page 11, on Exhibit 1, the goal of your treatment, one of the goals of your treatment with Dr. Lemaster was to determine that that technique that you employed, which I guess was popular in the 70s, is no longer appropriate and can be seen as sexual and threatening.
Mhm.
What have you learned about this technique?
Actually, it was made clearest to me by Dr. Lockton, the educational review person. She said, look, as a woman, that could be considered sexual, or that she did consider it sexual. You know, and again, it's like, oh my God, really? And okay, so trying to think of an analogy here, and with my anxiety, I'm not coming up with anything.
Well, let me ask you this, Doctor. As you sit here today, do you understand that what you did was absolutely wrong?
Yes,
Are you remorseful for it?
yes. How many thousands of dollars have I spent?
Was it just the money?
No, God, no.
What else did you learn?
What did I learn about what?
About the situation,
Okay.
the incident?
In my family, I'm the oldest child of three. My father was initially a private practice physician in Alaska. He was gone most of the time. My role in the family was to take care of the younger kids and to take care of mom in so much as I could. That kind of just translated into my adult life that, okay, so I'm supposed to take care of those people that are in my charge in one way or another. And so I've always striven to do so. I never looked at the underlying premise to say, well, wait a minute, why was the oldest child responsible for this in his own family of origin? And how is that going to be inappropriate in other circumstances? That really was the thrust of my therapeutic work with Dr. Lemaster, to try and look at that and figure out those things and see through my history just how I tended to step up rather than step back and, you know, make the determination, am I really the responsible party here? So.
In the evaluation, specifically on page on Exhibit 9,
Mhm.
AGO 183, you were evaluated, and the following DSM-5 diagnostic criteria were met: adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depressed mood, and you also have obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Do you see that, Doctor?
Yes.
I guess, what are your coping mechanisms in terms of dealing with this diagnostic criteria,
Well,
if your petition was granted?
right. With the adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depression, you need to understand that this evaluation was done immediately following the implementation of the probation. I was very stressed and upset. I felt very ashamed, very remorseful. So I don't think that I suffer from an adjustment disorder. Well, right now, I'd say it's probably adjustment disorder with anxiety, not with the depression. Regarding the obsessive compulsive personality disorder, anyone who has a PhD in psychology has a little bit of OCPD. It's the only way you can get through grad school, or at least, you know, it's very functional in terms of getting through all the coursework, you know, learning everything that you need to learn, mastering the body of knowledge, and so on. So I don't know that that interferes with my clinical work. If anything, I tend to be, kind of, I want to make sure that everything is done correctly.
In that same report on AGO 0186, it mentioned that the present interview at the time and assessment indicate that you do in fact feel very remorseful about the impact of your behavior on patient DS.
Right.
It also states that the nature of your defenses include a learning curve regarding sensitivity to the feelings of others that are subtle and not obvious to you. As you operate from a place of rules and instruction, your religious background and strong moral requirement to do that which is consistent with the values of your deity guides your desire to do right by your patients. Could you explain to the board this statement in terms of your remorse and what, benefit did you have from the multiple psychological evaluations and therapy?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm not sure that the psychological evaluation, was of a particular benefit for me. My understanding was the board was trying to determine, in a matter that had sexual abuse tied to it, have I gone off the deep end? Am I safe to practice? In terms of my beliefs, is that what you're asking about?
Yes.
Okay.
Basically, I just wanted you to explain this statement and if you agree with it.
Yeah. I'm a priest in the Episcopal Church. It was my first vocation. While I was serving in the Diocese of Utah as a parish priest, I went to Utah State and got a master's and doctorate in psychology. I have always been very concerned about ethical behavior. I have always had an ethical understanding about things, that I don't go off and do things just because I have a wild idea and think that might be a good thing to do. I try to judge the things that I might want to do against my own values before I do anything. As a priest for 9 years, I never had any problems with my parishioners. There were no allegations of any sexual improprieties. That's not just, it's just not how I work. When I've been married twice, I've always been very loyal to my wife.
Let's focus on the remorse with regards to patient DS,
Okay.
Doctor. Could you explain how the therapy helped you in realizing that what you did was wrong?
I think I tried to do that. Perhaps I wasn't clear. In terms of my family of origin, I assumed as a small child that I needed to take care of the other members of my family.
Could you relate that to patient DS?
Yeah, here's a guy who was in clear distress. And in my sense, he needed some help in terms of being able to talk to the supervisor and come to some different understanding and get some help from the supervisor rather than just the threat that unless you make your patient comply somehow, you're going to fail the course. I was at that point simply doing what I thought he needed. Since that time, I found, no, that's not at all what the patient needed. The patient needed some help in, taking responsibility. The questions that I should have been asking were, so what are you going to do about this? And apparently not doing anything really isn't going to be a very good solution. So you're going to have to come up with something else, and what might that be? I did him harm in the sense that I wasn't asking the right question. I wasn't pointing him in the right direction to take more responsibility for his own behavior. The last thing that I want to do is to cause anyone harm.
And you do admit, as you sit here today, that you did cause harm to patient Diaz at that point in time?
Yes. Not by intention, by simply not understanding some parts of myself, by not understanding this possible sexual connotation of enacting that particular part of sculpting.
Okay. In terms of what will you do if ever this petition were granted? What is professionally, in terms of what would change?
Well, things have already changed. I'm sorry, I'm not waiting for you all. That intervention, as I said, is no longer in my repertoire. And one of the things that I have been doing, I've been taking a series of continuing education courses from Larry Hedges. He's one of the two people that wrote a letter on my behalf here. And Larry has developed a kind of psychotherapy that is much more looking for developmental crises. And these are not the typical crises that you learn in grad school. Larry is a psychoanalyst and has gone into this material at a much finer level of detail. And now one of the things that I'm doing is I'm sitting back and using the interaction with the client, just the conversation, to try and identify, okay, what's going on here? What's driving the client's frame of reference? Why are they seeing the world like they are? And then tying that back to specific problems, the problems that they come to see me for.
My last question is, why did you file this petition for early termination? Don't you feel that you would benefit with the extra probation?
I filed it because I believe that I'm rehabilitated. I asked the people that I was working most closely with, my therapist and my practice monitor, do you think I'm rehabilitated? I don't want to be out there practicing if I'm a danger. I don't want to do this to anybody else. And both of them said, we think you're doing fine. Okay, so I went ahead and made the petition. I don't believe that I'm going to get anywhere near this kind of situation again.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take a lunch break, and we will come back on the record at 5 after 1.
Okay.
5 after 1, off the record.
I need to go change where I parked my car.
Okay, we are back from the break.
Yes, right, on the record. We are on the record. It's February 15th, 2018, in the matter of the petition for early termination of probation of Christopher Sanders. This matter is being heard before the Board of Psychology, Department of Consumer Affairs, State of California, case number 2017 612-0977. My name is Marcy Larson. I'm an administrative law judge with the Office of Administrative Hearings. I'm presiding over the matter this afternoon, and there is a quorum of the board present. May I please take the appearance of the Deputy Attorney General?
For the Attorney General's Office, Deputy Attorney General Jansen Tan, T-A-N, Tan.
And counsel for petitioner.
Yeah, Jonathan Turner on behalf of the petitioner Christopher Sanders.
And Mr. Sanders is seated next to you, is that correct?
Christopher Sanders, correct.
All right, before we went on the record, there was a brief discussion between one of our board members and Mr. Turner. It appears that they may have gone to high school together. I know that that was something that was going to just be disclosed on the record, and the board member is going to address that.
Yes, Your Honor. Jonathan Turner, I went to high school together, but I feel like I am able to be an unbiased member of the panel.
Fair and impartial in your decision making.
Absolutely.
All right. Any response to that, Mr. Tan?
No objections, Your Honor.
Any objection, Mr. Turner? All right then. Just briefly, we're going to go over how the hearing is going to proceed this afternoon. Mr. Tan is going to give the board a brief orientation of the matter and provide me with a copy of the petition package. And then once he has done that, then Mr. Turner, you'll have an opportunity to just give a very brief opening remark. I will swear in Mr. Sanders, and then you'll have an opportunity to question him. Mr. Tan will have an opportunity to cross-examine or question Mr. Sanders, and then the board members may also have questions. At the very end, I will allow you both to give just very brief closing remarks. All right, any questions?
No.
All right, Mr. Tan.
Thank you, Your Honor. Members of the board, Your Honor, again, for the record, I am appearing on behalf of the Attorney General pursuant to Government Code Section 11522. I am here to assist the panel in fact-finding. My role is not adversarial, but is intended to protect the public interest. I'm here to ensure that the panel has adequate information which to make a decision. Your Honor, I'd like to start out with introducing the jurisdictional documents. First is Exhibit Number 1.
And counsel, I don't have a petition package.
Oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor. It's been a long day. I apologize. Your Honor, I would like to introduce or give you a copy and mark for evidence the petition for early termination of probation. I'm giving you, Your Honor, a redacted and an unredacted copy.
Right. Thank you.
And if it please the court, Your Honor, and the members of the board, I'd like to continue with introducing the jurisdictional documents.
Please do so.
Exhibit Number 1 is the petitioner's petition for modification or early termination of probation. It includes the narrative statement at AGO 9, the disciplinary action information sheet at AGO 10, the evidence of rehabilitation sheet on AGO 12, a forensic psychological evaluation, and other attachments to this petition. Exhibit Number 2 is the notice of hearing. It shows or reflects the date and time and place of today's hearing. Exhibit Number 3 is the certified decision and order adopting the stipulated settlement and disciplinary order, of which the accusation is also attached. And briefly, Your Honor, I'd like to give a brief summary of this case and the decision. The decision in order was effective August 26 of 2015. The penalty stipulated upon was revocation stayed, 5 years probation with terms and conditions, including psychological evaluation, a practice monitor, psychotherapy, alcohol and drug treatment program, ongoing treatment program, abstain from drugs and alcohol, and submit to biological fluid tests and samples together with standard terms and conditions. The accusation charged petitioner with conviction of crimes substantially related to the practice of psychology and use of an alcoholic beverage to an extent injurious to himself or others in violation of the rules of conduct. The accusation stems from 2 convictions for DUI. The first conviction was November 7, 2014, where petitioner pled no contest to a DUI. In this case, petitioner's blood alcohol level was 0.21%, about approximately maybe twice, a little bit more than the legal limit. The second DUI conviction was on May 2008. This occurred earlier in time, where petitioner's BAC was respectively 0.16%, or twice the legal limit, and 0.15%. Moving on, Exhibit 3 is the probation intake report. I'm sorry, Exhibit 5 rather. I'm sorry, I lost count. Exhibit 4 is the
I have Exhibit 4 as the certification of licensure.
yes, Your Honor, that is correct. I apologize. It is the certificate of licensure, where it reflects that the probation in this case was told multiple times, March 6, 2017 through March 18, 2017, April 18th, 2017 through April 21, 2017, and is currently told as of August 13, 2017. It also reflects that a citation was issued on March 24, 2017, and I will discuss the reason for that citation as we go through the documents. On Exhibit 5, we have the probation intake, acknowledgement of decision. AGO 174 onwards reflects the stipulated settlement and petitioner's initials on the left-hand side, showing that he understands the terms and conditions of the settlement. One of which is on AGO 180, paragraph 16, where if the respondent should leave the state of California to practice outside the state, respondent shall notify the board, and the non-practice during this time shall toll the probation. Moving on to Exhibit 6, we have the actual probation report. And again, based on the probation report, Dr. Sanders' probation status is currently told with no expected completion date, as Dr. Sanders does not reside in California. Dr. Sanders also, his probation was also told from March 6th through March 18 and April 18th through April 21 due to non-practice in California. Notable facets of the probation report for the benefit of the board and Your Honor. On AGO 66, condition number 7. On April 15, 2016 and March 11, 2017, Dr. Sanders was issued 2 separate violation of probation notices for failing to provide a sample when required to do so. On AGO 0067, condition number 13, the probation report reports that Dr. Sanders, on or about April 26, received a notice of probation noncompliance for failure to provide a fluid sample on April 15, 2016, and that on March 13, 2017, Dr. Sanders received a violation of probation for failing to provide a sample when required to do so on March 11, 2017. Due to this missed test, Dr. Sanders was issued a citation. Of these 2 violations of probations, only one resulted in a citation, and as we go through the documents, I'll explain why. Exhibit 7, we have the letter from Dr. Sanders explaining why he missed the April 15 test. And it states here that he was actually able to retest the next day, which is why the first violation did not result in a citation, because he was able to retest the next day or the next morning. On Exhibit 8, is the first notice of probation non-compliance. This again results from the missed tests. After the provided explanation, the board wrote Dr. Sanders and explained to Dr. Sanders that he is now or was now back in compliance at the time, and no further action will be taken. Exhibit 9 refers to the second missed test on March 11. This is the other notice for violation of probation. On Exhibit 10, we have Dr. Sanders' explanation for the second missed test on March 11, 2017. On Exhibit 11, we have the actual citation order for that missed test on March 11, 2017. Since he was not able to test during that March 11 incident, we have no information on what was the status of his biological fluid information at that point in time. So a citation was issued. Exhibit 12 is a letter regarding the tolling of probation. The board wrote Dr. Sanders that his probation will be tolled from August 13, 2017, because he is not going to be practicing in California. Exhibit 13 is the quarterly report of his probation monitor or practice monitor. Exhibit 14 is the mental evaluation dated 1/15/2016. Exhibit 15 is the substance abuse evaluation dated 8/26/2016. Exhibit 16 is the treatment plan by Dr. Gina Wind. Exhibit 17 is the CV of the evaluator. And Exhibit 18 is the practice monitor compliance certification. Exhibit 19 is the practice monitor's quarterly verification reports. Exhibit 20 is the practice monitor's letter regarding a letter of explanation, because apparently instead of face-to-face evaluations, it was a Skype teleconference module that was used. Exhibit 21 is a Nebraska certification. So due to these, the DUI convictions, Dr. Sanders was disciplined by the state of Nebraska, I believe, and he was put initially on a temporary psychologist license. This was sometime in November 10 of 2016. And this temporary license was converted into a probationary license sometime in early 2017. And on October of 2017, his license was fully reinstated. Your Honor, we would like to introduce into evidence subject to sealing, of course, and you do have the redacted copy as well, Your Honor. Exhibits 1 through 21 into evidence.
Any objection, Mr. Turner?
No.
Exhibits 1 through 21 are admitted.
And, Your Honor, we have nothing further subject to cross-examination of petitioner.
All right, do you wish to give an opening remark?
Just briefly, and as the board will hear, Dr. Sanders, back in June of 2014, so almost 4 years ago, drove drunk, and that was a life-changing experience for him. Since then, he has stopped drinking, but moreover, he's undergone a great deal of rehabilitation, which you'll hear about. Specifically, also a lot of it is in the exhibits. That rehabilitation included an 18-month alcohol education program, regular AA meetings, which he still attends to this day, private therapy that he did with Dr. Wind, who's you have some reports from her within the exhibits, as well as doing the evaluation with Dr. Atwell as well. And both Dr. Wind and Dr. Atwell found that he essentially had a good prognosis in terms of not having any more problems related to drinking again in the future. He was placed on probation, as Mr. Tan stated, about in August of 2015, I believe. That probation was told, but you have his probation monitor's reports, which show someone who's been essentially totally compliant with everything he was supposed to do. Regarding the 2 missed tests, you have Mr. Sanders' explanations for those. You'll hear from him personally today about the circumstances behind that. The bottom line is that he was not intentionally trying to miss tests in order to conceal alcohol intake or something like that. Both of them were missed due to understandable circumstances. He rectified the error almost right away, which is why the board didn't take more significant action against him. It's true his probation was told in California in about August of 2017, so he's on probation with this board for about 2 years, but he remained on probation for another period of time in Nebraska. And he'll talk about why he moved to Nebraska, but the bottom line is that he did so back, I believe, in the summer of 2017 in order to basically start up a hospital, and he'll talk about that. But he's done wonderful work starting up a hospital there, an acute rehabilitation hospital, and he serves as the director there. He has even more career goals, and unfortunately, being on probation here in California hinders those goals. You need an unimpeded license in order to obtain, for example, board certification. Also, he wants to be on the National Register. We'll talk about that, which would allow him to practice in other states, specifically, in this case, Maryland, because he has an ailing father in Maryland, and he would like to be with his father, but also be able to practice. So he has some really important reasons for getting off of probation, but the most important thing is that ultimately this board need not worry about him being off probation or having any problems with alcohol in the future, and I think that'll become apparent as you hear from him, as you review the documents before you. And so it's our hope that this board, which I know has the duty to look out for the public and the public safety, you'll realize that you don't need to have great concern for the public safety at this point in terms of Dr. Sanders. And I think not only his sobriety and rehabilitation over the past several years are proof of that, but also the fact that his professional record has been flawless since the incident at issue, and in fact, his professional record has always been flawless, such that whatever problems with alcohol he had, which he's since overcome, never hindered his professionalism as a psychologist. Thank you.
All right then. Dr. Sanders, I'm going to swear you in. If you would please rise. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Please have a seat. And please state and spell your name for the record.
Christopher Sanders, CHRISTOPHER, Sanders, SANDERS.
All right, Dr. Sanders, I just want to remind you that it's important for you to wait until your attorney finishes his question before you answer it. If you could also speak up, that would be helpful. Our court reporter has had a long day, so if you can speak a little slower than you normally do, that would, I'm sure, help her out. After Mr. Turner's done asking you some questions, Mr. Tan will have an opportunity as well. The same rules apply. And then we'll open questioning up to the board members. All right?
Your Honor.
Mr. Turner.
Your Honor, I do have some additional exhibits. I don't know if I should address those first.
If you would please, yes.
Yeah, and I've made copies for each board member.
You may approach with those.
Okay, all right.
And Mr. Tan has a copy as well?
Yes, Your Honor.
And your copy is on the top.
Okay. And I think we have a few extras.
We may, yeah. I can take those back.
That would, yes, thank you. All right, so marking for identification, Exhibit A are the additional rehabilitation documents. Exhibit B is the additional letters of character support. And then Exhibit C is the National Register of Health Service Psychologists. Mr. Turner.
I'd ask to move those into evidence.
Any objection, Mr. Tan?
No, Your Honor.
Exhibits A, B, and C are admitted.
Okay. Dr. Sanders, after your DUI arrest in June of 2014, how did your relationship with alcohol initially change, if at all?
So, after my first DUI, I had changed things. I didn't drink and drive at all under the zero tolerance policy in law for 5 years. After that point, I made certain not to drink more than a maximum of 2 drinks if I was at a restaurant and driving. And I was able to do that for a year until the incident that occurred with the second DUI, in which case I had gone to an event that started in the morning and thought that the alcohol would have time to metabolize by the time it was time to go home, and that wasn't necessarily the case. And afterwards went to dinner and had more drinks, and at that point my judgment was impaired and got behind the wheel. At that point I was so upset with myself and disappointed because I thought I had a rational plan that seemed to be working to never let that happen again. At that point, after the second DUI, my enjoyment of alcohol began to subside. There was a lot of negative connotations, a lot of negative aspects to it. And so my frequency and amount of drinking began to drop. And then when I was served the papers for revocation in May of 2015, I believe, And it was at that point, I realized my career that I love so much was in jeopardy. That just really turned the screw in my perceptions and attitudes towards alcohol. And it wasn't long after that, I would go out and have maybe a drink or two at dinner, but the frequency dropped off, the amount certainly dropped off, and it was no longer enjoyable. And at some point, before my probation period began, I had stopped drinking. I've been asked what that date was. I don't recall the date because it was a gradual letting go of alcohol. It wasn't one last, catastrophic drinking episode that I would remember. So that's, to answer your question, that's how my attitude was shaped by my first and then my second DUI.
And I see on our Exhibit 8, page 4, there's a completion certificate for a 18-month alcohol education program. Can you talk about that program a little bit?
Sure. This program was once a week for 1 year. After 1 year, the meetings were less often. So 18 months total, and it was education/treatment. So we would have an education component along with just a discussion of what led up to our DUI. And it was a very humbling experience for me to be in that situation. Earlier in my career in Maryland, I had been owner and I had worked at different alcohol programs. So I felt as if I should know better. So it was doubly humbling for me to be in that position. Again, that helped to shape negatively my attitude toward alcohol and the whole culture of drinking that I had built up over the years.
And how often did that 18-month program meet?
Once a week for 1 year, and after that, and I don't recall the exact frequency, but it backed off somewhat for the last 6 months, I believe.
And I forgot to ask you, how did you feel emotionally after your DUI arrest in June of 2014?
I felt disappointed in myself. I felt extremely ashamed, humbled. I felt remorseful that I had put myself in a situation where I could have injured myself and, of course, other people. And also, if my patients were to discover this is public information, how that would affect them, how that everything that we've been through in therapy, how that may affect that information that they've already internalized, how that might damage them to find that out. That was difficult for me.
And when did you begin participating in Alcoholics Anonymous?
So that started when I began the 18-month outpatient treatment, and then continued on during the probationary period with the board. And
do you continue to attend Alcoholics Anonymous?
I do. I found that the quality of AA meetings varies greatly, and I guess everyone has their own needs, but I found one that really met my needs in California. So it took a while when I moved to Nebraska to find a similar one, which I did, particularly one, the Millard Club, which is, it has some really solid members who have years of sobriety, and the ability to really articulate how their life has changed and how their thinking has changed over time. I always leave there feeling really uplifted, and it's a great experience. So now I go at least once a month, if not more, when life becomes and work becomes stressful.
How long do you plan on attending AA?
As long as that group meets, I'll go there once a month just to have that experience. I've been in meditation groups in the past, and I come out with the same feeling, very centered. It's very life enhancing. It's a good experience, and it's one thing I'll keep with me.
What is your favorite step and why?
So I don't have any one favorite step. If I had to, I would say 11 and 12. In my 20s, in my first marriage in my 20s, we both did a lot of searching, a lot of comparative religious studies, and met with a lot of religious groups. And I found that the 12 steps were very similar to a lot of the cleansing rituals and the cleansing ceremonies that go on in different spiritual paths. But the essential nature, I think, of the 12 steps and other spiritual paths is that you cleanse out yourself, you get to know who you are. There's usually a sponsor type figure in there to help you see any blind spots, to truly know who you are. But the essential piece is giving back. So step 11 and 12 is really about centering yourself to divine will or helping others. And I think that's our highest purpose in life, is to help others. And I think that that gives me a sense of purpose in life, to be able to do that, which is why I love what I do, which is why I love my career.
And can you talk about your therapy with Dr. Gina Wind?
So Dr. Wind acted as a sponsor, as I mentioned, to help me move through seeing my blind spots, to really reviewing my life, and to set new goals and to reevaluate my purpose. And that's exactly what we did. She helped me through a period of time when I made a major career decision to leave private practice in California and leave the state of California and move to Nebraska. So that was a very timely and beneficial therapy for me.
And how often and how long did you meet with her?
As required by the board, it was once a week for 1 year.
And did she also do a substance abuse evaluation on you?
She did. In addition to the psychotherapy we did, she did a substance abuse evaluation.
And you may have addressed this, but is there anything additional you learned in therapy with Dr. Wind?
In addition to learning more about myself, I was able to uncover blind spots and address those blind spots. So I think increased self-awareness and accurate self-awareness was probably one of the biggest takeaways, as well as just her support through my processing my thoughts about the changing my career path and so forth.
And do you know what the results were of her substance abuse evaluation, which for the board's edification is Exhibit 15?
Mm-hmm. I believe it was alcohol abuse in sustained remission.
And did you also undergo an evaluation with Dr. Atwell?
I did.
And what did that evaluation consist of?
So she did a number of forensic tests. Her main goal was to evaluate my ability to still maintain a practice, my ability to practice. But she also included a number of substance abuse evaluations. One test to identify any defense mechanisms regarding substance abuse. So it was twofold. It was partly a substance abuse evaluation and how that ties into my ability to continue practice.
And for the board's information, I believe her evaluation is at Exhibit 14. Do you know what the results of her evaluation were?
Essentially, I was fit for duty, fit for practice, no restrictions.
And today, do you have any cravings or urges to drink alcohol?
No, in fact, I never did. Once I decided to stop, it was because of just all of the negativity associated with it. That I luckily I've never had any after that point cravings or urges.
If hypothetically in the future you did have such a craving or urge, what would you do?
If I were to have a craving or an urge, I would probably go to that meeting. That again, that is very centering. And I didn't say this earlier, but even though I didn't have cravings and urges, that meeting really helps me to be satisfied living sober. Not that I struggle with that, but it just really centers me and supports that lifestyle. And so if I had any inkling that going back to my old lifestyle of happy hours and drinks after work, I would simply go to one of those meetings, and that would reset I'm sure that would reset my mindset on that.
And can you talk about what you might have gleaned from the ethics course that you did as part of your board probation?
Right, so the ethics class was one of the stipulations, and it was a one-day workshop. We went over a number of issues outside of the reason why we're here today. It was good for that. It's always good to have an ethics overview. Things change. But one of the pieces was about professional conduct and making sure we adhere to professional conduct. And so in that way, it was very germane to why we're here.
And has alcohol ever impacted your work professionally in any way?
I had never gone to work hungover or drunk.
Where do you currently work?
I work at Madonna Rehabilitation Hospital, Omaha campus.
And what's your position there?
Director of Neuropsychology.
And when did you begin working there?
December of 2017.
And what are your professional goals at this point?
December of 2016. Right, 2000. I've been there for a year. Professional goals are are two main ones. One is to become certified with the Board of Professional Neuropsychology, which can't be done until my licenses in all states are cleared. And that would lend credibility to me as a director at the hospital and to the hospital at large. It would be helpful. Secondarily, I have applied for membership with the National Register for Health Psychologists. And as you probably know, it's a clearinghouse that allows for reciprocity to get licensed in other states. My idea was to, once I got the let me back up, I was recruited in Omaha because they were having some difficulty finding a director. So I agreed to go out and get things up and running. And I could easily stay there. It's a wonderful place to work, a wonderful staff. But also, I had in my mind at some point to find a suitable replacement and to move back to the East Coast where I was born and raised, because my parents are aging. My mother just passed away 2 weeks ago, my father is still there, so I'd like to be able to move there to practice at some point.
And there's our Exhibit C is a denial letter from the National Register. What's your understanding of why you were denied?
The denial is again based on license being on probation.
And I forgot to ask you, what are your duties as the director at Madonna?
So there is an outline that's more specific in in evidence, but essentially it's administrative and direct patient care. So I'm responsible for, there's actually 2 hospitals in one. And so I provide services through my staff and myself for both hospitals. We have a pediatric unit, we have an outpatient unit. So to break it down, administrative and direct patient care.
And have you received any feedback regarding your performance as director at Madonna?
I have. And some of that is in evidence. I meet on a regular basis with the administrator who I directly report to, and I've been meeting all of my financial goals, patient satisfaction goals, and so we're right on our mark there.
And the probation that the court put you on regarding your 2014 DUI, have you complied with all the terms and conditions of that probation?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, the probation that the court put you on in 2014, have you complied with all of the terms and conditions?
I have.
And are you licensed in Nebraska?
I am.
And when did you apply for your Nebraska license, if you recall?
It was, I want to say July 2015, I believe. 16 or 16. I'm not the greatest with dates. It was the July before I started work in December. So it took a while for the board in Nebraska to process that license because of the probation in California.
And for the board's information, I believe Exhibit 21, AGO 79 has a good sort of summary of the Nebraska licensing history. Do you recall when you got your temporary license in Nebraska?
I believe it was in November.
Of what year? And if looking at Exhibit 21, AGO 79 would refresh your recollection, please do so.
Okay. November 10th, 2016, offered to issue temporary psychologist license in Nebraska on probation. The acceptance of the temporary psychologist license took a... Oh, I apologize. November 10th, 2016, offered to issue temporary psychologist license on probation in Nebraska.
And what were your probation conditions in Nebraska?
So Nebraska just adopted the stipulations that California had already imposed. No changes.
So did Nebraska have you do urine testing?
They did. I had asked them if they would be willing to combine the testing with California's testing, so I wasn't running back to the lab so often. They couldn't do that, and I understand why. They're looking at different tests and so forth, and they have their own protocols. So yes, I was tested. I received testing from Nebraska, the state of Nebraska.
And so was that on top of the testing you had to do for California?
Yes, it was.
And did you have any violations of your Nebraska probation conditions?
No.
And when did your probation with Nebraska end?
October 24th, 2017.
And when did you receive, I know you got the temporary license in November of 2016. When did you get your permanent license in Nebraska?
Permanent license occurred on September 27th, 2017. That was the offer of reinstatement, and then my acceptance of the reinstatement offer was on October 2nd, 2017.
And do you recall when your probation told in California?
That was in August of 2017.
And was that something you requested?
No, I had, so when I left California in December, I had a handful of patients that either I couldn't refer out because no one took their insurance, or they had been with me so long, they just wanted to stay with me. And they were in agreement that once a month was appropriate. They had been with me long enough that that was clinically acceptable. So I would go to California once a month while living in Nebraska and maintain my practice. And then there were some changes that occurred in August with practice monitoring, and where practice monitors were required. I was required to see a practice monitor in California once a week, and at that point, it just wasn't financially possible to go back once a week to California to meet with a probation monitor. So and I only had 2 patients left at that point, and so I was able to refer them out and close my practice.
And why did your probation in Nebraska end so soon, if you know?
I had requested, I put a petition in to terminate probation.
And was that granted?
It was granted.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Tan, any questions?
I do, Your Honor. When did you file your petition for early termination with this board, Doctor?
The exact date?
If you know.
There are so many dates in here. I would,
Could you look at AGO 008 if that refreshes your memory?
oh, thank you. 10/9/17,
So that's October 9, 2017, correct?
correct.
Okay. Now, you also mentioned, Doctor, that you attended AA meetings and that those were particularly beneficial for you, correct?
Correct.
Do you recall what your date of sobriety is?
As I mentioned before, my drinking subsided slowly over time. It sort of titrated down. So I really don't recall any particular on the day that was my last drink.
But you do understand, Doctor, when you go to those AA meetings, that the date of your sobriety is extremely important, correct?
Well, it's important. It's important to some, and they have CHIP meetings where they give those out for anniversaries. For me, it wasn't the words that were being said, the stories and the message and the feeling. That was what was important, not so much having to remember a particular day that it was my last drink.
Isn't it true in attending AA meetings that your date of sobriety is considered your birthday even? Have you heard that expression before?
Sure.
Okay. But you don't remember yours, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Could you turn to AGO 009? And can you identify this document?
It's my narrative statement that went along with the petition.
Okay. It states here that you decided not to drink alcohol over 2 years ago, and you have remained sober since that time. Would you agree with that statement?
Correct.
Okay. Now, I'd like to turn to Exhibit 21, AGO 0071. Can you identify this document?
That's from the Nebraska Board of Psychology.
I'm sorry, what was your answer?
This is, well, it's hard to read. This is from the Nebraska Board of Psychology.
Would you agree that this is the letter that granted your reinstatement? Or rather, gave you your full license in Nebraska? The first part says this letter provides notification that on September 15, 2017, the Board of Psychology reviewed your reinstatement application, early release, and that the board recommended full reinstatement. Do you agree with that characterization?
Yes, I do.
I'd like you to turn to the third paragraph. So it says there that the basis for the Nebraska board's recommendation is your compliance with probation in Nebraska and California, and number 2, your evidence of maintaining sobriety for the last 4 years. Do you see that statement there?
Yes.
And I think you understand why, I have a little bit of concern, because it seems to me that you represented to the Board of Nebraska that you were sober for the last 4 years. At least based on this letter, if we are to believe the Board of Nebraska, correct?
I'm not sure their intent with that statement. I never said I was sober for 4 years.
Well, wouldn't you agree that that formed as part of the basis for the granting of your Nebraska license? It says so right there. Your evidence of maintaining sobriety for the last 4 years.
I can't speak to their intent with that statement.
But you do agree that based on your narrative statement dated October 2017 that you've only maintained sobriety for 2 years?
A little over 2 years, right, is in my narrative statement, correct. Correct.
Do you disagree with the statement by the Nebraska Board of Psychology?
I see what you're saying, and they had the same information that this board has, and they made their decision. I can say that they don't have, the Nebraska board doesn't have any limits on when a petitioner can file a petition for early release. I'm not sure how that pertains to what you're talking about here. They do things a little different there. And again, I can't really answer that question. I'm not sure
Did you
what their
make
thoughts were.
Absolutely. That is a fair statement, Doctor. Fair enough. Doctor, did you make a misrepresentation or a representation, rather, to the Nebraska board that you've been sober for the last 4 years?
I did not.
Okay. You do not know where the Nebraska board got this information?
No, I don't.
Do you know why the board granted you reinstatement after only about 4 or 5 months of a probationary license? I mean, when I say board, I mean the Nebraska board. Do you know why they granted you such a quick reinstatement?
I don't know why specifically. In talking with some of the psychologists in Nebraska, they only, they mentioned that the Nebraska board is very focused on supporting rehabbed psychologists and getting them back into practice. That's all I know about that.
Going back to your petition, when you were asked if life stresses were a factor to your violation, the DUI violation on AGO 10, you stated that, and tell me when you're there, AGO 10 of Exhibit 1.
Okay. I'm there.
Okay. In question number 2, you were asked if life stresses led to your action or inaction, and you stated that it was not a factor. If anything, it was the opposite of stress. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What are your current life stressors, if any?
Currently, it's the health of my family, my father, being able to get out often enough to make a difference. I was just there in December. And being far away, my brother and sister live close by and are able to be with them, especially during this time. And I'm not. And so that right now is a stressor for me.
And how do you cope with that stress?
By FaceTiming when my brother is, or my sister is visiting with my father, staying in touch over the phone as much as I can.
Do you have a network of colleagues or friends to help you out?
I do.
Do you mind emphasizing that to the board if you have already put it into your application?
Sure. I have a number, and this is in the addendum that came out, number of colleagues and friends who wrote letters of support. They're also in my relapse prevention plan. Brian Ernst, Travis Groff, Marilyn Veal, Ben Block, Mike Millen, Gina Hamilton, Kevin Paulus, Marnie Schneider. These are all friends, close people in my life who know my situation and support my decision for sobriety.
Okay. Now, your 2014 order of probation, when you pled NOLO, or did you plead guilty? I'm not sure. Yes, you did plead no contest. Do you remember what the terms and conditions of that probation was?
And for the Board of Psychology?
No, for your criminal probation.
In 2014?
Yes.
The terms were, there was a, not specifically, but there was a fine. There was home arrest for a period of time, which included alcohol, in-home alcohol screenings. There was the 18-month treatment program. I believe that was it.
Okay. Was there a condition that you abstain from drinking alcohol or
Yes.
driving a vehicle?
Oh, right, and there was also, well, that was through DMV. I had installed a breathalyzer basically in the car.
Okay. And that's part of the multiple offender program.
I believe that was sanctioned through DMV, not through the courts.
Okay. And you completed all the terms and conditions of your probation?
Yes.
Okay. And you mentioned that you're currently practicing in Nebraska.
Correct.
Could you describe your practice?
So it's 300-bed inpatient and outpatient hospital. We specialize in brain injuries, stroke, complex medical cases. So we do acute rehab once a patient is released from acute hospitalization.
Okay. And do you see patients in this practice?
Yes.
How many patients do you see on average per day?
If I had to, for one thing, it varies because I have a lot of administrative duties, but if I had to average it, maybe 3, 4, but that's not for a full hour session. So for instance, I'll do inpatient contacts that may be 15-minute continuity of care contacts, or I may do a full day outpatient neuropsych evaluation. So that the length of time for patient contacts varies greatly.
I see. Do you mostly see TBI patients, traumatic brain injury patients, or what is your patient constitution, I guess?
So it's a mix of all patients there, including pediatrics. So TBIs, stroke patients. We have long-term acute care hospital in the basement, or on the first floor rather, and those are more the complex cases. I do a lot of capacity evaluations. I run exceptional rounds where we have patients having problems with participation or compliance or other behavioral issues related to TBI. I run education groups there, train staff. I train staff in nonviolent intervention techniques.
Mr. Tan, I just want you to be aware of the time. I want to make sure our board members have time to question Dr. Sanders, and the intention is to finish up by 3:30 today, so the board has time to deliberate. So if you could please keep that in mind.
Thank you, Your Honor. One last question. Doctor, if this petition is granted, what are your future plans in terms of the work in Madonna rehabilitation? Are you going to move to the East Coast that you mentioned?
So my plans are to, as I said, I could easily stay there. I love where I work. But my parents' health took a turn quicker than expected. So I think in the next year or two, I'll look to find someone to take my spot, and I'd like to move out and spend time with my father, with what time he has left, and practice in Maryland.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you. All right, I'm opening up to board members, starting to my right with Dr. Phillips.
Thank you, Your Honor. Hi, Dr. Sanders. I'm curious, so you moved to Nebraska in December of 2016,
Correct.
and you didn't go on tolling until sometime in 2017.
Correct.
And that was because you still had an existing practice in California.
That's correct.
But you no longer resided in California?
That's correct.
How many months did you actually reside in California where you were actually on probation?
From September through December of, year and 3 months.
Okay,
That's correct.
okay. You would like to keep your California license?
I would like to have it cleared so I can become board certified and get that membership with the health psychologist reciprocity committee.
So you understand that if we clear your license, we're saying you can practice with mental health and psychological consumers in the state of California.
Correct.
And our obligation is to protect those consumers.
I understand that.
Okay. So what assurance do we have at present that you're actually sober?
Well, you have all of the reports of testing I've done, and you have my personal word.
Okay. But we don't have the results of drug testing as we would normally if you executed the full 5 years of probation, correct?
Well, that's correct.
Okay. You did put in several letters today, which I had an opportunity to look over. We didn't get an opportunity to look at them too much in advance. Are any of those people members of AA?
Not that I'm aware of. These are close friends and colleagues.
But that's your primary support group for sobriety,
Correct.
people outside the program.
Correct.
And your program right now consists of going to a meeting once a month about?
Yes.
Okay. And your relapse prevention plan is if I feel like drinking, I'll go to a meeting?
Yes.
And that's it?
That's it for me. I never felt like I needed a sponsor there, only because I never had cravings. And how I understand the sponsors work is that they're there if you have a driving urge to drink. But I found that the meetings themselves are very supportive to support my choice and my lifestyle not to drink.
So you chose not to actively participate in AA, or as actively participate in AA as some of the other members, people attending the meeting?
So, correct. I participated. I found what I needed there, and I didn't see the added benefit of having a sponsor because, as I mentioned, Dr. Wind had taken me through sort of that process of discovering blind spots and moving to a different way of thinking.
So Dr. Wind worked the steps with you?
Not the steps, but the essence of the steps, the spirit of the steps.
So you've never actually completed the 12 steps?
Never completed the step.
You never completed the 12 steps?
I could say yes, but I'm not even sure. Yes.
Have you gone systematically through the steps?
Probably not systematically, no.
Okay. And you understand they're to be done in order? And that there's a logic behind them?
I do.
Okay. You said Dr. Wind was kind of your sponsor? Did she say she was your sponsor?
No, but it was a sponsor-like relationship. And someone that I could confide in, who would help me look at inside myself, discover the blind spots, help me support healthier changes.
Yeah, I'm confused about your relationship with Dr. Wind.
Sure.
So Dr. Wind did a formal evaluation of you,
Correct.
and Dr. Wind was your therapist.
Right, she did a substance abuse evaluation, but she was also the provider for that 1 year of psychotherapy that was part of the stipulations.
Do you see a conflict between those two roles?
No.
Okay. Dr. Atwad did it looked like a fairly extensive battery of tests on you,
She did.
and you practice neuropsychology.
I did.
Is it your practice typically when you've done an extensive battery to do a 2-page report?
No, my reports are more extensive.
Why didn't Dr. Atwad do an extensive report indicating the results of the testing?
So it's my understanding that she had a number of health problems, and she was unable to complete the report. I had spoken with Barbara Tanner, the then probation coordinator, and there was a lot of interaction between Ms. Tanner and Dr. Atwal about completion. And finally, Dr. Atwal was able to give just a verbal consent that I was able to practice. And at some point down the line, she managed to write what brief summary she did. But I think it was abbreviated because of her health problems, is my understanding.
So the reason she said the client told me I didn't have to write a full report was because of your conversations with Ms. Tanner?
The reasons why Dr. Atwal said
In the report, she says, I don't have to write a full report because the client told me I didn't need to write a full report.
that's news to me.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding or misremembering it. Let me just see if I can find Dr. Atwal's report. I think I'm gonna let you know as soon as I find it.
Page 17 of the long running thing.
Okay.
Is that exhibit 4? Exhibit 4.
It's also Exhibit 14, Your Honor.
Yes. Exhibit 14?
I believe it's the same document. Exhibit 14.
Yes.
Are there two different versions of the report she gave?
So I'm looking at AG 294.
Mm-hmm.
And where in this do you see that statement?
There was a shorter form of report than this, which I want to say is AG
AGO
290.
13, Your Honor. AGO page 13 and 14.
So chronologically, so I understand, she did the shorter report and then she did a longer report?
13 and 14.
This is it.
It's the same one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the same document.
So where would I find that statement?
I got to tell you, I'm having trouble finding it myself right now. You said it was AG 13?
AG 13, 14.
And where was that on the, or is that the one we're already looking at?
Yeah, 17.
I'll see if I can find it. I won't belabor this point and keep everybody waiting for me to find it, but I will find it for you and maybe we can circle back to it. Okay, I think that's all the questions I have for you. Thank you.
All right, additional questions? And just remember to just speak a little slow.
Dr. Sanders, I guess I wanted to follow up on that question also about sponsor, since you mentioned Dr. Wind as a sponsor when you were speaking earlier. You also mentioned that 11 and 12 were your favorite, and so I guess following up on that question that Dr. Phillips asked about you going through the entire steps. Clarify that for me and tell me a little bit more about the fact that 11 and 12 are your favorite.
Okay. So, again, I did a lot of comparative religious studies in my 20s, and I found a lot of similarities in the types of approaches that different groups use for the sort of a ritual cleansing. And there was certain commonalities, and the 12 steps were in a lot of ways along those lines. It's about understanding ourselves, cleansing that out, making a commitment to the divine, whatever that might be, and then service to the tribe, the community. And so that runs through all of time, of different ways that people have put together spiritual programs, so to speak. And so 11 and 12 for me, and in all my religious, spiritual pursuits, really the bottom line for me is our reason for being here is to connect with other people and to help others. And that is innately just gives me a sense of well-being. And so that's, I think, the essence of 11 and 12 is having been through that journey, not being perfect, but at least striven for perfection and always striving for perfection and betterment, doing our best to help others and give and be of service.
And just two follow-up questions on that. I know in my pages are all off, but the narrative statement where you basically do a lot of reflection as to which meetings you find most useful for you. And you mentioned that you prefer those with the older individuals and folks that have been around for a little longer. Given that kind of scenario, I would wonder why you wouldn't decide to have a sponsor, because I would imagine, given those more traditional groups, that would be kind of the way it goes. So can you share on that one? And then I'll ask the second question together, because you might want to answer them together. I lost my question. Just answer that question, please.
So I did approach somebody at one point about, it was one particular gentleman who I really love when he speaks, and I feel a connection. But he also said that he expects a lot, and he usually turns people down because they can't meet the expectations he has for sponsorees. And I devote a lot of my time to my work. I mean, I was starting this program from scratch, so it took a lot of time and effort. I just didn't feel that I didn't know if I would have that level of time that he was requiring for that. So I chose not to. But just to hear him speak, and others like him, he's not the only one. There are a number of really quality folks in that group that I benefit from.
And given your commitment to the giving back, has anyone approached you to be a sponsor? Given your kind of regularity of going to the meetings, even though once a month, and your connection with individuals at meetings?
No one's approached me, and I wouldn't. I don't think that I have. There's many more quality sponsors there for people rather than myself.
And finally, you mentioned that you go once a month except when times are more stressful. In the last year and a half, had you had many stressful points of time? You shared about the recent passing of your mother. My condolences.
Right.
But in terms of how you've utilized that avenue.
There was one time that I can recall when my mother was doing especially bad. This is maybe 8 months ago or so. And I went to, I don't know how many a week, but more than I had been.
I have a couple of questions, Dr. Sanders. The first has to do with your probation being told. I'm not quite sure how this works, but it almost sounds like it's impossible to get off of probation if you live out of state. Is that
Correct.
Is that correct? So the only way you could get off probation is to have it ended early through a hearing like this?
Correct.
That's a curious quirk in how things, probably a lot of thoughts about that that we all might have. more substantive, I was thinking about what you said early on, the part about, I think it was after the first drunk driving. You were completely, if not sober, or if not abstinent, you were sober for 5 years after the first drunk driving. And then I'm wondering, do you recall how,
I was not sober after I was not drinking and driving.
okay, thank you, yeah. Something that's woven throughout the story of recovery or rehabilitation is intent or resolve, and for most people, I think. And it seems that you had a resolve to not drink and drive for 5 years. I'm wondering if you've reflected on how that changed for you at the end of 5 years, and accordingly how you might handle things differently so that you didn't get on the slippery slope of, in your case, it was a second DUI.
So after the first one, I thought I had a plan that was sustainable, and it wasn't. And that was very humbling and shameful. So that's what prompted my decision to, this isn't the lifestyle that I need. And I found that over time, by being sober, that I could live my life and do all the things I enjoy without alcohol. I haven't stopped going out to dinner. I haven't stopped playing sports. I haven't stopped going to barbecues. The only thing I don't do is go to happy hours anymore. There's nothing there for me. But everything else I've maintained in my life and been able to enjoy even more. I enjoy sobriety.
Okay. No further questions. Thanks.
All right, any questions?
Hi, Dr. Sanders. Just wanted to express my condolences for your recent loss. And I only have one question. It's with regards your sobriety day. I don't think we got an answer for that, and I understand that it's not as important to you, but would you be able to give us your sobriety day?
An exact date?
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I don't know what that is. As I said, I slowly stopped drinking, and at some point, and I just don't know when that was, it was my last drink. It wasn't a monumental occasion. It wasn't anything like hitting rock bottom. It wasn't catastrophic. It was just, drinking just slipped into my past, and there was nothing to demarcate. That was the last one.
Would you know the month then?
I would know. It was probably, so it was after I received the notice of revocation from the board. It had already subsided quite a bit. That was the final straw, and I think soon after that I just never drank again. So I would say it was probably that summer, sometime in that summer, June maybe.
Thank you. And I just wanted to share that I found the line that you were looking for, and for the purpose of the board, it's AGO 0294.
What page number is that?
For the long list, it's page 107 out of 177.
It's 107 of the continuous document.
Oh, I see that.
All right, in addition.
Well, I think okay. So Dr. Atwell was struggling to get anything put together, and Ms. Tanner had told me, well, she gave us the verbal, okay, that you can practice, but we need something in writing. And I think that's when I called Dr. Atwell, and I just said, I understand you have health problems, but please put something together, at least something minimal to go on that will suffice for the board, rather than nothing. I had already paid for this, it was a requirement, and I was pleading for this to be done.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, additional questions?
Hello, Dr. Sanders.
Hello?
just wanted to ask, surely can, what do you feel, what is the difference between sober and not drinking? Or stop drinking? For you?
I'm not sure I see a difference there. There's a sober lifestyle. There's a sobriety takes on the connotation of more of a long-term type of a goal or a determination rather than not drinking, which could be short-term or just. Sobriety implies maybe some intent to stay sober rather than not drinking. Somebody could not drink for a week with no intent to continue not drinking.
And how do you see which category might you put your?
Mine would be sober, in that I have an intent not to drink in the future.
Okay. Have you tried any other programs other than AA?
So, you mean, for instance, rational recovery, the self-help programs?
Yeah.
I couldn't find any in my area. And when I first started AA, I didn't find them that helpful, but that's only because I didn't find the right groups. And so, as I mentioned, there was one particular group in Moss Landing in California where I went, and they were similar to this other one that I spoke about in Nebraska. Really a quality, articulate group that really meant a lot to me, and the message sank in. So I didn't need to search anywhere else because my needs were met by those groups.
So, last question, I just wondered, and someone had already asked this, when a life-changing event happened in our lives, while we might not be able to remember the exact date, but is it something about when that happened to you? And I noticed you said it was probably in the summer. Can you describe the time when you had that moment, that aha moment, to say, this is just, I'm not going to do this anymore, or however you found that moment? Can you describe something more than it was the summer
Right, so
around? Okay.
I remember thinking, I haven't had a drink for a while, and there's no reason for me to have a drink. I'm making a lifestyle change. I've made a point to do this. I've told the board I'll do this. There's no reason to continue drinking. So there was that, I guess, that point in time where I realized I'm done with it. But that wasn't right at the moment of the last drink. There was some separation there. And I'm sorry, I just don't remember when the last drink was.
And the very last question. When you had a plan, you mentioned you had a plan, and that plan was found to be unsustainable. Were you in AA at that time?
No.
When that happened? So what was the time between that moment and the time you sought out AA?
So that was, I found it wasn't sustainable at the time of my second DUI. When that happened, I thought that I would have the wherewithal to keep my behavior in check and not drink more than 2 and drive. So at that moment, that's when, does that answer your question? That's when the switch occurred for me?
And so what was the time span between that and your seeking out AA?
So I sought out AA as a requirement of the courts. I had never experienced AA. I wasn't sure if it would be helpful. So I'm glad for that experience, because what I found was the opposite. It was helpful, extremely helpful.
Thank you very much.
All right, questions to my left? No questions?
Hi, Dr. Sanders. And again, I join my colleagues in our condolences to you.
Thank you.
So I know we're focusing on the date thing. So I'm just curious, was drinking a daily occurrence prior to when you just noticed that there was a winding down?
It was never a daily occurrence. And so you're asking, in the winding down period, it certainly wasn't at that point. It had never been a daily occurrence.
And before the winding down, it was never a daily occurrence in the
No.
first place. So so because it wasn't a daily occurrence, after a series of non-drinking of days, that's when you just picked that up. Is that correct?
That's when I picked up.
That's when you had that rough realization that you haven't had a drink in a while.
Right, and why have a drink anywhere in the future now?
Exactly. Okay, that's helpful. And just for clarity, have you ever been accused of practicing under the influence while in Nebraska?
No.
And you have had no discipline record during your time in Nebraska. Is that correct?
Correct.
And have you been arrested for a DUI in Nebraska?
No.
And you mentioned that this has been a stressful period of time for you.
Yes.
And have you feel this urge, or have you drank since
No.
this? Okay, that's all my questions.
Right then, if there's no further questions? Oh, yes, there's
Two quick ones.
Dr. Phillips.
Dr. Sanders, are you an alcoholic?
Yes.
Okay. That's the only question I had.
All right then. We've addressed all the exhibits. You'll both make it very brief closing remarks, please, starting with Mr. Tan. We'll allow Dr. Sanders to have the last word.
I just want to say, in the final analysis, we have 2 missed tests. We have a sobriety date that we cannot determine, and we have a Nebraska order for reinstatement that states that he was sober for 4 years, when, based on this narrative statement, he was only sober for the last 2. There's a lot of reservations, and I just don't think that the public would be served with this early termination, Your Honor. I have nothing further.
Mr. Turner.
Thank you. And Dr. Phillips asked what assurances the board has that Dr. Sanders will remain sober, not have problems with alcohol, which is obviously the board's concerns. And I think the assurances are the last problem with alcohol was in June of 2014. Since then, Dr. Sanders has made intense changes and undergone significant rehabilitation. That includes Dr. Atwall's evaluation, and then his continued participation in AA. So I think that's a good chunk of rehabilitation that he's done. And then the other sort of factor is the professional record. Obviously, if he was having issues with alcohol, we would see something there professionally. That's why the professional record is so relevant in these cases. There's never been a problem professionally, but professionally he's been really doing wonderful since 2014. I mean, he goes to Nebraska, opens up a hospital. That's a large hospital. He's gotten great feedback during that time. So obviously, this isn't, the work of a drunk. We know often people who are alcoholics, who are relapsing, you'll see the impact of that first professionally, and we're not seeing that. And again, we have now a record of almost 4 years on his part. So he is asking for early termination here. The statute obviously allows him to request early termination after 2 years. And I think he's met his burden to show that ultimately he is sober. He has overcome his problems with alcohol, that this board does not need to be concerned about the public. I should add that, he does have professional goals that are inhibited by the fact that he's currently on probation. And as Dr. Erickson mentioned, he's sort of in this no man's land where if he doesn't get off of probation, he's going to be stuck on probation forever, and he can't get his board certification. He can't get on the national registry. But I think really this is the case where if you're going to grant early termination for somebody with 2 DUIs, this is the case. And I guess sort of the last thing I would mention is just you've gotten to see him today. He's answered questions candidly, I think, and presented himself well. And so I think that needs to be taken into account as well. This isn't a drunk. This isn't somebody who's still dealing with a problem with alcohol, and he's assured you that, he's sober. He's not drinking again in the future. And I think you can take that to the bank. Thank you.
All right, you have a protective order, Mr. Tan?
I do, Your Honor.
All right, and because there's no copies of that, I will take it and sign it, and then you will, Mr. Turner, Mr. Tan, you'll receive copies of that in the mail.
Your Honor, may I approach?
You may. Thank you. All right, Mr. Turner, is the matter submitted for the board's consideration?
Yes.
Mr. Tan?
Submitted, Your Honor.
All right, the matter is submitted and the record is closed. We are off the record. All right, I have the form that gives information for the court reporter, and then once you get that, you're free to go.
At this point, the board is going to be going into closed session to discuss, among other things, the petition hearings. So I would ask that everyone who's not a board member or authorized to be in that meeting to please